Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 7, Episode 5. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, our very special guest is Greg Hicks, President and CEO, Canadian Tire Corporation, one of Canada's biggest and probably most iconic and successful retailers. Now, I may be biased, but I really enjoyed listening to Greg's strategic retail thought process in our interview so much I almost forgot to ask the next question.
I
may be biased.
We know anytime we get close to the Canadian third rail that something's going to happen. I don't know. That's probably a really mixed metaphor, but good conversation. Canadian Tire, I first got to learn about way back when in the 90s when I was at Sears, and we still had a business, but particularly a Canadian business. So when I first got into the corporate strategy job, I remember going on up to Toronto and getting briefed on the competitive landscape in Canada, and Canadian Tire was definitely one of those companies that we worried about. But here we are, we flash forward, and Sears is basically gone, and Canadian Tire keeps on rolling.
Yeah, great metaphor there. And Canadian Tire, for those listening, more than just tires. So they're a fascinating retailer. We'll get into that a bit later. So listen, summer is clearly over. I don't know if the weather's telling me that or if just the calendar. You and I are back on the road to see the people, which is great, and talk to the people. We're together in the Vantage Podcasting Studio at Grocery Shop in Vegas in a few short sleeps. I'm off to Halifax next week first. What else is on your travel and speaking agenda for the fall?
To a certain degree, it feels like all things Canada, though I will not be seeing you in quite a coincidence, though not really. I will be up in Edmonton with the Canadian Tire folks speaking at their annual event. I'm looking forward to that. And I will also, a few weeks after that, be up in Ottawa. I work with a Canadian retailer up there. So big month for Canada. And then I just decided, I'm not speaking, but I just decided I'm going to check out the Web Summit in Lisbon in November. So that should be fun.
Let's see. After Vegas, I've got a session with an international retailer in Canada that's bringing in their folks from around the world for a summit. I'm on the stage with a very interesting session at Retail Council Sustainability Conference. I'm on the stage interviewing the president of Procter & Gamble Canada, the COO of Walmart, and the president of the LCBO, another iconic Canadian retailer. Fun factoid. Number 2 buyer of wine in the world.
Couldn't get any big brands to show up at that.
Exactly. Fun factoid. Number 2 buyer in the world is the LCBO, which is the liquor on provincial liquor. Do you know who the number 1 might be?
I'm going to say Costco.
Very good. It was Costco. Very good. Yeah, long held by the LCBO, but Costco passed them by a little bit a while ago. And then I'm off to New York for Global E-commerce Leader Forum, and then Vancouver. You and I were off, Mike, talking about our the performance, so to speak, our downloads from our latest solo episode. Very popular, kind of continuing on this growth trend. Like we've said, we had 60% growth year over year, I guess, comp store growth, or comp listen growth.
Yes. Definitely industry leading compared to some of the earnings we'll talk about in a minute. But
that's right.
Yeah, the episode's doing really well. It looks to be, it's still a few days in, but it looks to be perhaps on track for being our most popular episode this calendar year. I think this idea of an escalating commitment to a failing course of action maybe just fundamentally resonates with people in the retail context. I was also thinking about it in just the broader context, and I'm not going to get politically specific here, but I was thinking about some of the polls that have come out in the States in the presidential election. And, you basically have the vast majority of people that want neither Trump nor Biden. Yet at this point, it looks like they're likely to be the candidates. So a lot could happen, but you sort of step back and go, do you really want, for whatever your reasons, do you really want either of these guys to get elected and serve, at their age in particular for, it'll be five and a half, almost 5 years by the time they would serve out their term. Then you got Elon Musk in the news constantly, doubling down on what is very obviously a failed strategy on all fronts. The stats coming out of Twitter are just terrible. So I think, there's lots of places in our personal life and in other business places where just objectively you see people on a losing path, and in some cases even a accelerating decline, just stick to their guns without being willing to see there's a different path. So I think there's both kind of a personal growth story here, there's certainly more than just the retail story.
Yeah, well, it's clearly resonating with the listeners. So thank you everybody for listening. All right. Let's get into the news of the week. So lots of earnings, but they all tell not dissimilar story, I guess. So kick us off with talking about Dollar General.
Yeah, well, I'll try to be brief because there were a lot. And yeah, for the most part, they were pretty depressing. Dollar General, one of the big dollar store players, had a pretty tough quarter. Their sales were up, but mainly because of all the stores they're opening. Something like 990 stores are going to open in the next year, and they've opened a bunch already. But their comp is basically flat, and they blame traffic declines. And it's kind of interesting because, with this flight to value that we've seen, particularly for the past year, this doesn't seem to be playing out with Dollar General. And I don't know whether it is a function of poor execution on their part, or whether we're starting to see kind of this dollar store saturation, because it's just crazy. I mean, Dollar General has almost 20,000 stores.
20,000 stores.
Yeah, and then I should have looked at what some of the numbers are, but the major players all just have staggering number of stores, and so you just kind of wonder if there's starting to be too much capacity chasing even pretty nice demand.
And I also have to think that, given the current economic climate or forecasted climate or whatever you want to call it, even other Main Street retailers who may play a click above the dollar store category are kind of bringing some assortment down. So that creates, even more saturation, so to speak, for the same type of items, if you know what I mean, or the same price points.
Well, certainly if you look at what Walmart's been able to do, they've obviously continue to attract a pretty good amount of business despite being huge. So, and yeah, we're seeing promotional pricing get tighter. We're seeing more private label brands, those kinds of things. So, yeah, it's interesting. And then in the kind of more mid-market apparel space, American Eagle reported, and they actually, I think, beat expectations, but store revenue was up with 4%. Digital was down 7%. One of the more interesting things we continue to see, and some of this is a rebalancing for sure, but a lot of retailers are reporting that their year-over-year digital business is down.
Yep, I'm hearing that.
I understand that in the 21 to 20 comparison, and even in the 22 to 21 comparison, a little harder to understand in the current context. What I think we're seeing is, even though sales were pretty anemic, they did okay on the profitability side because they were able to get their gross margin up quite a bit, taking expenses out. So this is a bit of a pattern we're seeing where not a lot of top line growth or even declines, but margins were okay because of focus on inventory productivity and SG&A. Express, this was really a train wreck, really a terrible quarter. To contrast with American Eagle, their gross margin went the other way, went from 33% all the way down to 23% because of markdowns. The comp in their physical stores, their combined physical and e-commerce in the Express brand, down 13%.
Wow.
Their outlet sales, here again, what's going on with the value segment? Their outlet sales were down 17%. And they swung to a loss. Now, folks may remember they acquired the Bonobos brand from Walmart. So they reported that the quarterly sales for Bonobos was about $40 million, which is not a smaller number than I thought. But I thought the most interesting thing, and I don't know this person, so I don't want to say bad things about them, but they decided to bring in the new CEO. And guess what his background is? Well, processed and fresh chicken. Yeah, new CEO from Tyson Foods. So that's a little designer brands, which most people...
I don't even know how to respond to that, actually. I'm sure, very talented individual. Sure.
Yeah. Well, we had a guy when I was at Sears that came in with a chicken background, and he unfortunately was known. Good guy, not a lot of retail, but he was known around behind his back as Chicken Man, the Chicken Man. So
nobody here but us chickens.
Yes, we're too busy counting our chickens. In any event,
apparently before they hatch.
Man, this is like metaphor a go-go.
We'll be talking metaphors till the cows come home if you don't stop me now.
All right. We can edit that out, right? Okay. Designer brands, which most people will know principally for their DSW format, but they also own Ked's brand on the Ked stores and something. Also, really bad performance. Again, mostly kind of value segment. So you'd think they have some trends working in their favor. Comparable sales for the past 6 months down almost 10%. Profits were down, but again, here's a case of somebody who's been really focusing on taking some costs out, so the margin rate wasn't too bad. Then a little bit more on the luxury side, Saks, which is not public, they did a little bit of a report on how they're doing, and the answer is not really great. Sales down the past quarter 11%, which kind of lines up with where Neiman Marcus also indicated they were in the past quarter. Their profits were up year over year. Again, focus on this year of living efficiently. So lots of issues in the luxury department store, whether we're talking Saks, Neiman's, Nordstrom. And then our friends at RH, I would encourage people, maybe we'll put a link to it, for people to go read Gary Friedman's commentary on the quarter, which is always very entertaining and very visionary and aspirational. Tough quarter for them, sales and profitability down. How much of this is their particular execution versus kind of the just general troubles in the high end and in the home category in particular?
The buy forward stuff, yeah.
Yes, but they are going through apparently a comprehensive refresh. They believe the first half of next year will be an inflection point. Presumably that means headed up, I guess. But but a lot of what he talks about, which I think I'd love to, not specific to RH necessarily, but just kind of talk about this broader ecosystem, sort of retail as a platform as opposed to just a format, because they've famously gotten into restaurants and hotels, and they don't like to.
Did
call
you see
them
they opened talk about doubling down on a strategy? They opened a huge, massive, very impressive store. I guess you can't hardly even call it a store in the UK.
Yeah,
which is
like way outside of London, I think.
Just giant mansion, basically. I think they bought it from the Royals or something by the look of the place. But certainly they're going in the same direction. So I guess it's an escalating commitment of some sort, right?
Yeah, we shall see. I mean, I love the vision. Whether there's a danger of overshooting the runway, so to speak, I guess time will tell.
Hey, let's end our conversation about news of the week on an up note. Tractor Supply, who we had a great interview with Hal Lawton, and a very impressive business. They're talking about picking up the pace of store expansion. There's a great article in Wall Street Journal introducing to some or reaffirming to some. What do you think of the news out of Tractor Supply?
Well, number one, we obviously are big Tractor Supply fans here at the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Number two, the point that I think I made in my predictions for the year and we touched on is this kind of the strong get stronger, the weak get weaker. And Tractor Supply's got great momentum, and they see the opportunity to take what has been a pretty aggressive pace of store expansion over the last few years to take that up to the next level. Now, whether that's just increasing confidence in the strength of their pro forma, or whether that's, while their competitors are maybe licking their wounds or what have you, it creates opportunity. But I think it's just a great example of a brand that's really got a great focus, great execution, and still some pretty good runway. The other thing too, it's just the backdrop to this is I saw Coresight said that, and it's probably a hard number for people to get their head around, that retailers are going to open, U.S. retailers are going to open 78 million square feet of new space this year. So I'm starting to think that physical retail may not be dead. This could be me.
The other thing, and I just add to Tractor Supply, is during the pandemic, a lot of people found new retailers, right? They made different choices and they switched brands for necessity or for, just because. And I think it's interesting that these retailers now have the opportunity to kind of try to keep those customers. Hey, you came to us for X when you needed us, and we sell interesting stuff. So I think there's a bit of that in there now. Speaking of interesting retailers in the disruptor reset, so to speak, Reese Witherspoon had I don't know if anybody's aware. I wound up talking to somebody from Draper James a while ago. Really interesting brand. It's Reese Witherspoon's apparel brand, but she has sold the brand. And talk about what you think about that in the context of trends overall about what's happening in retail.
Well, it's hard to look at any one, but we continue to see a pattern of these DTC disruptor brands doing some sort of reset or shift to their strategy, you would have thought, I would imagine that Draper James would either go public at some point, given its growing business, their own stores, e-commerce presence.
Good story, nice assortment.
Wholesale distribution, right? Famous celebrity, et cetera. Or maybe get acquired by, I don't know, VF Corp or somebody. Yeah. But here they are taking an investment, more of a financial kind of investment. I just think the path to profitability and the path to sustained growth, they're just getting tougher and tougher for most of these brands. So this in and of itself is not necessarily big news, but if we kind of look at the pattern of what we've seen over the last 6, 9, 12 months, lots of kind of resetting, reshaping of the playing field that's going on.
Well, all right. That's the news of the week. Now let's get to our interview with Greg Hicks, CEO of Canadian Tire.
Well, it's a real honor to welcome the CEO of one of the top retailers in the world, but most certainly in Canada, Greg Hicks from Canadian Tire. Welcome, Greg. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're super. I'm a little. We were talking off mic. Given how hot it is, I'm a little jealous not to be up in the north. But I do have air conditioning, so we're not going to get too worried about me. But Greg, we usually like to, before we kind of get into what Canadian Tire is about and your strategy and growth plans and things like that, we usually like to just start out quickly to hear a little bit about how you ended up where you are. A little bit about your personal and professional journey and your role at Canadian Tire.
Guess I'd start with the fact I have a fantastic wife and 2 great children, 2 sporty teenage boys. So we have a pretty active household. From a career perspective, I guess you'd say retail and Canadian Tire, for that matter, has always been in my blood. My father was one of a few officers of Canadian Tire in the 70s through to the mid-80s. He headed up all of the company's real estate efforts. So he pushed a lot of dirt for the brand. Then in the mid-'80s, he left the corporate world to become a Canadian Tire associate dealer. His first store was a small town, 5,000 square foot store with a 6-bay auto service garage. And this was my first retail job, working at Canadian Tire as a teenager at his store. I loved almost every aspect of it. I had 2 uncles that were Canadian Tire dealers. My brother owns his own store today, so you really could say that it's in my blood. I joined the home office of Canadian Tire after university. I worked for 10 plus years in a variety of roles, everything from buying to supply chain, IT, store design. And then I left the company for about 8 years and jumped into an owner-operator private equity venture running Tractor Supply up here in Canada. It was a great ride, great differentiated concept. I know you've had them on the podcast before. Really, really great people, and I learned a ton, including real cash management as we were operating during the financial crisis. I left there. I ended up doing some consulting work for Lowe's International, focused here in Canada, when they were still in the early ages of their country expansion plans, and then came back to Canadian Tire in 2013. I've looked after quite a few functions over that time period, including our automotive business, our own brands, global sourcing operations, e-commerce, and most recently was our president of our core Canadian Tire retail banner. And then I became the CEO a day after the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. So it's been a crazy and hectic 3+ years, but a total masterclass in leadership at the same time.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward. Well, a couple of things that you touched on. We're looking forward to talking a little bit about your leadership style, but I think the whole connection, the family history and the dealer structure, which some people will be very familiar with, others will probably not have any idea what you're talking about. So we'll get to that in just a second, but maybe just big picture for folks that don't know much about Canadian Tire, given our global audience, a little bit about the history, the scope of the brand, how things have evolved over the decades, I think would be particularly helpful to just kind of set the stage.
I'm certainly biased, but I think it's a remarkable story. The company was founded by 2 brothers, AJ and JW Billis, back in 1922. So Last year was our 100th anniversary. We partied all year. It was great celebrations over and over. AJ's daughter Martha and her son Owen are the controlling shareholders to this day. So the company has great origins as a entrepreneurial family business. It started as an automotive tire repair garage, as per the name, and then over time evolved really with the needs of Canadians. Auto service led to cash and carry automotive parts and an automotive mail order catalog, which led to tools, then sporting goods for anglers and hunters, and it just kept evolving to continue to be more and more relevant for life in Canada. Guys, I know you have a fair amount of U.S. listeners who might not have an idea of our go-to-market strategy. So for those that haven't experienced Canadian Tire, think of the namesake Canadian Tire business as similar to a Pep Boys or AutoZone with service base, but also having an Ace Hardware, a City Target with no food, and maybe a Dick's Sporting Goods all under one roof. So it's much more than just tires. From a footprint or size standpoint, stores wide range. Stores are anywhere between 10,000 and up to 140,000 square feet. Our largest store. The strategy can morph pretty easily into any sized community across Canada. There's 500 stores, all run by associate dealers, as you pointed out, with stores situated within 10-minute drive of 90% of the country's population. But the company or the corporation has evolved beyond just the Canadian Tire format. We've also built or acquired companies that make our corporate structure more like an old school conglomerate. We started a bank 50 years ago to help finance our associate dealers, and now have one of the largest credit card books in Canada. Right up there with our top 5 banks here in the country. And we've acquired or built other retail banners like Marks, which is Canada's largest workwear business, and is quickly building material market share in the core casual category. A company like Sport Chek, which is Canada's largest sporting goods company. So the enterprise is a lot broader and bigger than just Canadian Tire. Now it's over $17 billion in the top line, 11 retail banners, a bank, as I said, hundreds of gas stations, a multi-billion-dollar real estate investment trust, the Helly Hansen brand globally, and a $6 billion own brands portfolio. And now all of those businesses domestically here in Canada are bound together with a loyalty program called Triangle Rewards, and it's a loyalty program that would have a household penetration similar to that of Amazon Prime in the U.S. And so, you ask about our point of difference. It's really that Canadian Tire is a brand that's deeply woven into the fabric of Canadian culture, and I'm sure we'll pick up on that a little bit later. We've even printed our own money until just recently, and we're considered Canada's second currency. Michael, I think you might have, I would imagine you'd have some Canadian Tire money stuffed in a drawer somewhere in your house.
Absolutely.
But I'd say the history of our brand is deeply connected to the history of the nation. We care about the communities in which we operate. Our dealers are heavily involved. They give back in these communities. And then we also supplement that with a national charity, which is Jumpstart, which is really our social compass, which helps underprivileged children participate in sport. So really, it's all about emotional connection, Canadiana emotional connection that makes us different and we think remarkable.
So I have just it's maybe a little bit of a digression, but as I think I worked at Sears back mostly in the 90s. And when I became the head of strategy there, which is kind of an oxymoron, I think, as a title, our CEO at the time, Alan Lacey, he had a meeting with the new executive team. This is like 2001. And one of the things he said was, let's all just acknowledge if you were starting a retailer from scratch, you would never create what Sears is today. And I'm curious, I don't want to make the comparisons to Sears too strong because that's not a great comparison, but I'm kind of curious how much of how you have evolved is sort of, a creature of history that's evolved to the right way versus, something that you think really I mean, obviously from a performance standpoint, it meets a huge need and you've got the results to prove. But I'm just kind of curious how you think about that, particularly as you evolve, maybe getting ahead some of the questions, but how you evolve for, the future and how things are changing.
Yeah, I think one of the most critical things in the evolution of Canadian Tire, and I tried to describe, some of it in your last question there, is it's always focused on being more and more relevant for life in Canada. And we talk often here as a management team about relevance. And at times, kind of pre-digital retail, I think many would question the eclectic assortments that live under one roof inside of a Canadian Tire store. But, now with kind of retailers that are competing with everything around relevance, not only, product categories, but services, all designed for relevance and ultimately, a connection, a relationship, and an increased share of wallet. I'm not so sure it's as crazy as it once was. I mean, the reality is, when you look at the categories in which we compete, there's no one category that brings the same customer back on a really, really frequent basis, like a food. But it's the amalgamation of the 300 or so categories that we go to market with that brings the same customer back with frequency. And so if the ultimate desire is relevance, ultimately, spend per customer share of wallet, I think the mix of categories kind of work well together here now in the search of relevance. And that's the lens by which we'll continue to evaluate our relationship with Canadians. It's just how relevant are we in their lives, and how top of mind and ultimately top of wallet are we with respect to their spend. So maybe a different answer I would have provided 20 years ago, but with the advent of digital and Amazon and other marketplaces, et cetera, I think our strategy may have just been ahead of its time from a relevant standpoint.
Greg, let's double click on the structure, the unique structure of Canadian Tire Retail. You mentioned it's part of the family, the associate dealer network. It's not quite a franchise. They're very important to the success of the organization. You get the power of local. It probably perhaps adds some complexity versus an owned and operated organization. It's probably a key success factor in your role is the working relationship with the dealers. I think they're that important. Talk about that a little bit and about the unique structure and how you work with and in partnership with dealers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. It is a model like no other. The model itself started way back in 1934, so it's almost as old as the company. The model at its core has a local store owner. Michael suggest, we call them associate dealers, not franchisees. The dealers own all of the fixed assets and the inventory in the store. They manage the day-to-day operations, including the people at a local level, and they curate an assortment relative to the needs of the local market. And I think that's a big, big point of differentiation. It's a pull model from an inventory standpoint. Mm-hmm. We corporately don't push a stick of merchandise to the stores. We don't sign the dealers' checkbooks. What we do is we find the real estate. We run the national marketing programs around the brand. We set the retail prices, and then we work to be the absolute best wholesaler we possibly can be. It's pretty much a closed distribution system. Every store would do some, like really, really local buying, but for the most part, most of the inventory, most of the dealers would buy product from us, or all of the dealers, would buy most of the product from us corporately, including our own brands portfolio that I spoke to earlier. Mm-hmm. We recruit the dealers, and then we manage their movement around our network of stores. And generally speaking, the larger the store, the more profitable the store is. And as a dealer, you just work your way up the system. We call it a mobility system until you get to your ideal store or landing place from a community standpoint. And then we're corporately responsible for finding a buyer for the store in that mobility process as the dealer moves to another store or retires. I think what's made the model so successful over time, and you hit on it in your question, is its true local capabilities. Right. Dealers very involved in their communities. In most communities, the dealer is known and the retail strategy, therefore, is highly localized. As an example, there can be huge swings in the sales mix of divisions from store to store as a result. Sure. A store in Northern Ontario would have thousands of fishing lures curated for the species in the region. Yeah. And our downtown Eaton Center store, which I'm sure you know, has a very convenient fishing assortment. And
good for condos, and good for condo owners.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And because of condos, they'd have no auto service base because people in that area, not a lot of car ownership, as an example.
Yeah.
And then I think the other huge component in our winning formula is that there's economic congruence in the model. Too often you read about issues between franchisees and franchisors, and the common thread in the disputes is usually a lack of economic congruence around the splitting of profits.
Yeah. Particularly around e-commerce, right, Greg? I mean, it's particularly gnarly when it comes to the different ownership and who gets credit and all that stuff can be quite gnarly for many organizations, right?
Yeah, who gets credit for the sale for sure. But our model has us. There aren't instances like that. Our model has us investing and growing together. It's very hard for the corporation to pad its wallet at the expense of the dealers and vice versa. It's a much more integrated model designed to win at the enterprise level. And I think when you have that dynamic, so you can appreciate, in my role as CEO, it has me essentially partnering with 500 local CEOs trying to win hearts and minds and wallets locally. They certainly ensure we never get too far away from what's good for the customer and that our programs are retail ready. And guys, I think it's real secret sauce kind of stuff for us.
For sure. Now, and my experience obviously with Canadian Tire, I used to sell to Canadian Tire when I was at Black & Decker. I've represented the organization Retail Council of Canada, and I shop. Obviously, I was there yesterday buying balloons for Party City for my mother's 90th birthday. So more than familiar with the organization. Not a history lesson, but as I look back in the history of fairly recent history, the retail analyst chattering classes would always forecast the impending demise some way, shape, or form of Canadian Tire. Right? I can think of big global mass merchants, big box hardware, giant online retailers come to town. Now, two questions. So, it feels fundamentally different when an international retailer launches into a country like Canada versus domestic competition. Would you agree? I mean, is it how as an executive team do you say, okay, we've got a new, pretty significant, well-resourced competitor coming into the market that's kind of not been here before? How do you think about that? Do you sit back and understand, do we double down on our Canadianness? And how do you think about that when new entrants come to the marketplace?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're so right, Michael. The famous quote that still comes up every now and again is when an analyst suggested we were a deer stuck in the headlights when Walmart was going to enter Canada back in the mid-90s. And for the most part at that point in time, I think the criticism was fair. We had the market to ourselves, and we were pretty complacent. But it made us reinvent. It had us doubling down on our dealer model as the real point of difference, and ensured that we co-invested. Ultimately, I guess, to build better experiences for the customer and for our brand. But again, you're right. I think it does feel fundamentally different when an international retailer launches in this country. Some have committed to invest, to understand the market, to build talent locally, and are now a formidable and trusted part of the competitive fabric. Walmart and Home Depot, top of mind here. Others have followed a different playbook, and the playbook had similar themes of not committing the time, the energy, and the resources required to understand the differences of this market and commit to actually executing differently here. You really can't use standard operating procedures from the U.S. Executives can't fly home on the weekend. You need to attack the micro seasons that make Canada Canada. You need to be guided by Canadian customer research. Yeah. When it snows here, Canadians call the thing that moves the snow a snow blower, not a snow thrower. And when you're cleaning your car, the thing in the middle of your tire is a rim for Canadians, not a wheel. Yeah. So I know those are silly examples, but they ladder up to curated execution for this market. And that's how I think I'd come at your second question, Michael. For sure, we do a full diagnostic on go-to-market strategies for big entrants. For the last few, we've used the analysis as a rallying cry to pivot for category opportunity where we might see it. But the most important consideration, I think, is just trusting the fact that we have an unrivaled understanding of Canadians. We have over 200,000 Canadians in our consumer research panel. It's the largest consumer panel in the country, and they give us direction on everything. From marketing messaging to our loyalty value proposition. And then we have thousands of Canadians a part of our Tested for Life in Canada product development process. So we've co-developed thousands of products and altered specs and features and benefits for thousands more, all aimed at what we like to say, making the jobs and joys of life in Canada easier. So we aren't just offering up a catalog, we're offering up a curated catalog, and call it it's almost a concierge service for life in Canada. And then when you get into the planning of the business, we manage the business on a 7-season planning process, would target hundreds, if not thousands of micro seasons. I was in one of our newest stores right before Canada Day weekend, and the group that I was with, we went from a 12-foot mosquito repellent aisle with price points from under $5 to it had to be over 80, and then to a 20-foot presentation of portable power products. And then we just happened to pass by the pre-made s'mores packages near the checkout. And you would know this, Michael. This is all part of a long weekend in Canada at the cottage, right? And so the curation is about enabling the shopping for that joy. So all that to say, while other retailers have pulled out of Canada in recent years, we still believe it's a market rich with opportunity for those who truly know the Canadian customer like us. And for us, I think that, from a differentiation standpoint, it's all about continuing to develop an even stronger emotional connection and work day in and day out to try and reinforce their trust in us.
So interesting. And I hope for the listeners, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, yes, there are clearly some things that are very particular to Canada, but there are also many things you were doing that I think are great lessons for any retailer in any country. Like I think particularly about the way you have all that rich customer data and the way you're tying together, kind of like a platform of retail, as opposed to just thinking about it as, this is a channel, this is a product that we happen to sell. So I think that's very cool. Before we let you go, I have two questions that are related, I think. One is, from a leadership perspective, how do you balance the short-term needs of retail? I think, many retailers, Canadian Tire included, are finding some headwinds in terms of being able to drive top line and profits with longer-term things. And in particular, the second question, I guess, relates to this new format store that you've opened and are looking, I assume, to roll out, assuming it performs well. So could you just talk a little bit about how you balance the short and long term, and then tell us a little bit more about your new concept stores?
Sure. From a short and long-term standpoint, there's always, a tremendous, balance required. I think, for me as the CEO, prioritizing my time is a constant work in progress. The business of retail can just come to you every day, every week, every year for that matter. They go by so fast. We've recently tried to think about the allocation of my time having an objective of creating 10x impact. And we've identified a few focus areas where I'd like to spend my time, and we're tracking time spent against the focus areas. So I'm trying to be more purposeful, not quite in the rhythm I'd like just yet. I know when I talk to other CEOs, they say it takes time. And one of those focus areas is just a continued focus on execution. We strongly believe we're a well-disciplined executing retailer. We're more the hedgehog in the Good to Great book. Some of those processes that I talked about with respect to how we manage seasons and go to market, how we work with our dealers, and a whole bunch of committees from technology deployment to advertising to visual merchandising, et cetera. There's just this constant requirement and focus for us because of the model to be very focused on execution. It's truly, it truly is what helps us, win in the market. And so how do we balance that with ensuring in times like this where the demand environment is a little softer that we don't lose sight of the strategy is also, a tightrope. And, when I think about how the team and I manage it, I have a fantastic team, I might add. We love the phrase that, some of the most profound things in life are exceedingly simple, and ensuring you have a very well-articulated, well-understood, multi-year strategy would fall into this camp. And so we've spent a good amount of time articulating what we're in service of, our brand purpose, the values that support the purpose. We have 5 strategic pillars in our strategy. 16 strategic initiatives live underneath those 5 pillars. And we have shared language around the strategy right down to the lowest levels of the organization. And we work it every day, from resource allocation to course correction. So I'd say, this is the key, because retail can pull you in all sorts of directions every day, as we all know. So one of the other things that we've also been doing, which I think has been great for me and not something that I've done for my entire career, is also being focused on leaving time to discuss, debate, and articulate what a Horizon 2 strategy could look like. And I've found this, 2 horizon strategic planning process extremely, extremely helpful in my role as CEO.
And how did that get you to these new concept stores, or did it get you to these new concept stores?
It did, for sure. Strategically, you gotta, when you really do strategy right, you've got to think through what you're in service of and just how you go to market and stand up a differentiated strategy in front of the customer. I'd start with the fact that we came to terms with the fact that we aren't a pure play and we aren't a physical retailer. We're a company that's focused on customer experiences at the end of the day, and how the integration of physical and digital come together to create better experiences. We call it connected retail. I think, Steve, you might call it harmonized retail. I like that phraseology as well. But the Remarkable retail stores in Ottawa and Welland, which are both in Ontario, they really represent the next generation of Canadian Tire's large format retail stores. They're the biggest and best representation of our connected retail innovation. Innovation that sees the store playing a very different role than it ever has. And I know you've talked about this, but we're trying to change the context for our stores. If I told you that we had 40 million square feet of same-day micro-fulfillment center space within a 10-minute drive of 90% of the Canadian population with free parking that just happen to have storefronts attached to them, I think your context changes pretty quick.
Right. Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's as you've talked about, Steve. It's the store as a gathering place. It's a shopping destination. It's a media opportunity. It's a logistics operation. For us, it's an automated, tech-focused warehouse, and it's a place with these much bigger stores. It's a place to advance a career, not just have a job. So, we're focused on better connecting the digital and physical worlds, and we're enabling both channels to complement and amplify each other to deliver a better customer experience. And so, we're really happy with the 2 stores, and very happy. In terms of our Concept Connect format. We can't build monster stores in every community in Canada, but the Concept Connect format takes the best elements of the Remarkable retail format, and we see hundreds of communities of opportunity in Canada to roll out that format. And we really think it delivers on the next generation of shopping for Canadian Tire.
Well, Greg, thanks so much for joining us. It's been so interesting. As well as I know Canadian Tire, just hearing you articulate both the background, the scope, the scale, and the strategy and your insights, just fascinating stuff. And I want to mention the genesis of this interview was actually conversations around the table in Barcelona at the World Retail Congress with your team, Susan and Rachel and the team. So wanted to do a quick shout out to them and the comms people helped to make this happen. So listen, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. It's been a real treat. And I wish you and the team continued success. And thanks for your time. You're a very busy individual, so we really appreciate you taking the opportunity to speak with us.
Well, thanks, guys. It was my pleasure.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our great episodes, including our recent interview with Carrie Baker, President, Canada Goose. And be sure to drop us that 5-star review where you listen to your podcast. It really helps us spread the word.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategy and innovation consultant, keynote speaker, and author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me at stephenpdennis.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and producer and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.